Welcome to part 2 of the voiceover lecture for Chapter 11, the Cardiovascular System. If you haven't yet, please watch part 1. Previously, in part 1, we discussed sections 1, 2, and 3. In part 2, we'll discuss section 4 on the cardiac cycle, section 5, the anatomy of blood vessels, section 6, the blood, and in section 7, we'll talk about cardiovascular health. Section 4, Heart Physiology. Now let's discuss blood circulation. Like other fluids, blood always flows from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. You need to know the order of structures of the heart that blood flows through. As we discussed in part 1, blood first enters the heart via the vena cava into the right atria. From there, the blood is pumped into the right ventricle, and you should know all subsequent steps that we discussed. If you don't know the correct order of blood circulation, now is a good time to go back and review this material. As mentioned, the flow of blood is divided into two routes or circuits. Systemic circulation is the flow of blood from the heart to the tissues of the body and back, where pulmonary circulation is the flow of blood from the heart to the lungs and back. I've included this diagram just to emphasize that you should know all of the structures that are shown here. If you don't know these, take a moment to review until you feel comfortable with all of these parts of the heart. Here's a diagram showing the flow of blood through the heart. Now let's discuss the physiology of the heartbeat. Unlike skeletal and smooth muscle, heart muscle does not need the nervous system to tell it to contract. We'll discuss the physiology of muscle contraction next semester. But for now, know that an action potential is what causes a muscle contraction. Skeletal and smooth muscles need a signal from a neuron or from the nervous system to initiate an action potential, but not the cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle can generate its own action potential in a specific area called the sinoatrial node, or SA node. The SA node is located within the right atrium of the heart. The SA node sets the natural rhythm of the heart. It's nicknamed the natural pacemaker and contains the pacemaker cells we mentioned in part 1. The heart rate is the number of contractions of the heart within a minute. The average heart rate for a person at rest is 75 beats per minute, though it can vary from 60 to 100 beats per minute. Now, even though the heart can set its own resting rhythm, the autonomic nervous system and our endocrine system modify the heart rate. They can cause the heart rate to go up or to go down. They can also modify the strength at which the heart beats. Systole refers to the heart contraction. Diastole refers to the relaxation of the heart. Both ventricles contract at the same time, and both atria contract at the same time. But the ventricles and atria, their contractions are offset. Ventricular contraction does most of the work and is the strongest. So the above terms refer to ventricular pumping, unless otherwise noted. Section 5, Blood Vessel Anatomy. Let's discuss the general anatomy of a blood vessel. The term lumen in general means the inside space of some structure. In terms of blood vessels, the lumen is the central space through which blood flows. Endothelium is the innermost layer of a blood vessel. It's the layer that comes in contact with blood. It's composed of simple squamous epithelial tissue. There are many other layers outside of the endothelium. These layers vary from vessel type to vessel type and are somewhat beyond the scope of this course. Now let's discuss the difference between arteries and veins. Arteries are the larger vessels that carry blood away from the heart. They're under a lot more pressure. Veins are the larger vessels that carry blood to the heart, and these vessels are under a lot less pressure. Now let's discuss the difference between arterioles and venules. Arterioles are the smaller vessels that carry blood away from the heart. They are like small arteries. Venules are the smaller vessels that carry blood to the heart. They're like small veins. And finally, we have the capillaries. Capillaries are the smallest blood vessels in the body. They connect arterioles to venules. They play a role in regulating body temperature, but their most important job is gas exchange. It's at the level of the capillaries where oxygen diffuses out of the blood into surrounding tissues, and CO2 diffuses from the tissues back into the blood. In this diagram, you can see several types of blood vessels depicted. Here on the right are arterioles. They're going to carry blood from the heart down to the capillary bed. In the capillary bed are the capillaries. This is where gas exchange occurs. Blood continues through the capillaries into the venules, where it will travel back towards the heart. By convention, we often color oxygen-rich blood red and deoxygenated blood blue. Here we can see blood flow through capillary beds. A capillary bed is a cluster of capillaries. On the left, blood is flowing through the capillary bed. On the right, flow is restricted. Blood flow is controlled by small rings of smooth muscle at the arterial end of the capillaries. These muscles contract or relax to regulate blood flow. Why would we want to restrict blood flow to a capillary bed? One reason is to regulate body temperature. When you start becoming cold, your body wants to retain as much heat as possible. One way of doing this is to restrict blood flow to our extremities, like our hands and feet. This is why those areas are the first to become cold. We also want to control blood flow to muscles and organs, depending on whether or not they are currently being used. Section 6. The blood. First, let's discuss the cells found in our blood. We have two major types of cells. Red blood cells, also called erythrocytes, are the cells that contain the hemoglobin proteins, and it's hemoglobin that carries the oxygen in our blood. The second major type is white blood cells, also called leukocytes. Leukocytes are the immune cells that help fight infections. Next semester, in the immune system chapter, we'll discuss the various types of leukocytes. The second major component of blood is plasma. Plasma is mostly composed of water, containing dissolved ions, nutrients, hormones, and proteins. One special type of protein is fibrinogen. This is the protein that helps blood clot. Serum is blood plasma that has had the fibrinogen filtered out of it. The various components of whole blood obtained from a patient can be separated using a centrifuge. A centrifuge is a machine that separates the components of a mixture based on their density. A sample is put in the machine, which simply spins the sample at a high speed. This causes denser substances to sink and lighter substances to float. This diagram depicts whole blood that's been separated in a centrifuge. Red blood cells are the densest substance, and so they sink to the bottom. You can see the red blood cells make up about 45% of the total volume of the blood. In the middle is a thin white layer, sometimes called the buffy layer. This contains blood platelets and white blood cells. And up above, the straw yellow layer is the blood plasma, which makes up over 50% of the volume of blood. In the last section of this chapter, we'll discuss the various issues that can arise in the health of the cardiovascular system. This table, though a bit outdated, shows the leading causes of death in the United States as of about 2010. You can see the number 1 leading cause of death is heart disease. Number 4 is stroke. And at number 13 is chronic hypertension. All of these problems are problems with the health of the cardiovascular system. In Canada, the leading cause of death is cancer, but the second most leading cause of death is heart disease. One of the leading causes of death is a myocardial infarction, also known as a heart attack. Heart attacks are caused by a low blood flow to the heart. And by blood flow to the heart, I mean flow through the coronary blood vessels. Low blood flow to the heart means less oxygen to the heart tissue, and this can cause tissue death within the heart. One of the major symptoms of a heart attack is angina pectoris, or chest pain. Myocardial infarction is one of the most common causes of death in wealthier nations like Canada and the United States. Another major health problem in the cardiovascular system is atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is the buildup of plaques underneath the endothelial layer of our blood vessels. Plaques are composed of LDL, low-density lipoprotein, and immune cells. Atherosclerosis may lead to arteriosclerosis, which is a hardening of the arteries. The suffix sclerosis means to harden. This buildup of plaques under the endothelial layer can lead to a bulging of the blood vessel. This bulge will push into the lumen of a blood vessel and cause turbulent flow of blood. Turbulent flow of blood increases the likelihood of a blood clot forming. It also increases the blood pressure as the heart has to work harder to push blood through the narrowed vessel wall. Atherosclerosis, if unchecked, can lead to heart attack or stroke. And finally, let's discuss stroke. A stroke is poor blood flow to the brain, which leads to the death of some of the brain cells. There are two types of stroke. Ischemic stroke is when the blood supply to the brain is decreased by a blockage. Hemorrhagic stroke is when capillaries break and release blood into the brain and put pressure on the brain's tissues. And that concludes our voiceover lectures for Chapter 11 on the cardiovascular system.